So good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Tabuns. I'm the MPP for Toronto-Danforth. I'm the host this evening. I want to welcome all you attendees. I want to welcome people to this webinar, part of Black History Month, an opportunity to talk about history of Black people in Ontario and Canada and their resistance to oppression, to racism, and to bad working conditions. We've got a strong panel assembled. Before we go on to there, I just wanted to give our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit peoples. Tonight, we have the opportunity to listen to a panel share a narrative that many might not be familiar with. An opportunity to learn, for some of us, a different history, one which shaped our past, impacts us today, and hopefully one you'll remember to affect the future by your actions. We'll be listening to each panelist speaking about their area and ways we can all engage, and then we'll have an opportunity for people to express their concerns and raise questions. If you want to pose questions or comments, please use the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We won't be using the raise hand feature and the chat, just the Q&A. So we're going to go through, and I want to introduce our panelists. Our first person, but not our first to speak, is Felicia Samuel. She's a regional representative for the Ontario region with the Canadian Labour Congress. She's the first Black regional representative hired by the CLC. Prior to this role, Felicia served as an executive officer with the Elementary Teachers of Toronto, an executive member of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, and a vice president of the Ontario NDP. Felicia was an ONDP candidate in 2018 and 2022 in Scarborough Rouge Park. She also ran as a municipal candidate in Scarborough North in 2018. Felicia is a proud trade unionist, Scarborough resident, and is committed to holding governments and institutions accountable to the folks that they serve. Next, I want to introduce Nigel Barriffe. He's an elementary teacher with the Toronto District School Board and vice president with the Elementary Teachers of Toronto. His volunteer work includes board chair of the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, board member of the Toronto Community Benefits Network, board member of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Sorry there, Nigel. And a board member of a different book list cultural center. Nigel's activist work focuses on quality public education, good green jobs, and a more just society for all inside and outside the classroom. His efforts have been recognized through several community service awards, including the Urban Heroes Award and the J.S. Woodward Award. And then Christopher Wilson, first vice president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, the Ontario chapter. Christopher is a community and labor activist with over 20 years experience advocating for workers. He's a co-investigator in the Green is Not White research project to confront environmental racism. And Chris lives in Toronto-Danforth. So I'm going to go to the panelists' comments. The panelists have between 5 and 8 minutes. And I just want to remind all of you again that if you have comments that you want to pass on, questions you want answered, enter them in the Q&A, and they'll be forwarded to me by the staff who are doing the work in the back office of this Zoom get-together. We're going to start off with Christopher. Chris, do you want to start in?
Sure, and thank you, Peter, for this opportunity to join this panel in recognition of Black History Month. I'm going to use my time to talk a little bit about the history of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Unions have a long history in Canada, and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters plays an important part of that history from a Black historical perspective. There's a plaque located actually in downtown Toronto, which is a site where sleeping car porters worked for the Canadian Pacific Railway. Where they prepared passenger cars for travel to the United States and across Canada. Porters were working for Canadian Railways came from Black communities in Canada, the United States, and the Caribbean. Porters faced institutional racism in all aspects of their work. Their pay was lower, they were barred from promotion to supervisory positions, and they were excluded from white railway workers' unions. They began to organize most successfully in 1939 by joining forces with the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, an American union created in 1925. And in 1945, they formed the first Black union in Canada to sign a collective agreement with their employer, the CPR. The gains they made were significant, including salary increases, paid vacation, overtime pay, sleeping, and better working conditions. I bring this story forward to the present day in terms of significance, but because when we look at institutional racism that continues to persist today in our workplaces and within our unions, I think about recently the COVID pandemic, for example, which had a disproportionate impact on the Black community, where many Black workers working in healthcare, education, grocery stores were disproportionately exposed to the virus. So institutional racism continues today. I want to talk about one porter in particular from a Black historical perspective, Stanley Grizzell, who wrote his memoir, My Name is Not George, because when working as a porter, white passengers often referred to Black porters as George instead of identifying them by their name. And so it was a question of pride to be recognized for your name. And that's one of the demands that Black porters put forward through their union. Some of the issues that Stanley Grizzell advocated for included having the right for porters to have their own name cards so they can have the dignity of being called by their name. He also put pressure on the employer to make managerial positions available to Black workers. And I think about how relevant that remains today when you think about the Black class action lawsuit, for example, where Black workers employed in the federal public service are demanding an end to systemic barriers and advancement through employment equity in the workplace. So the issues that Black porters fought for through their union remain as relevant today. And I think one of the lessons I take from this story is the importance of self-organizing. I'm an activist within the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and one of the things we say is, quote Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. And what this story tells me is that if you're interested in challenging, if you're compelled to challenge racism, particularly structural racism, you need to think about how you can confront the employer, how you can shift the balance of power in the workplace. And self-organizing is one of them. And within the Black community, we look at different ways in which we can do that, such as forming the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists or forming structures within various unions to give voice to our community and Black workers across the labor movement. So I will stop there for now, Peter, because I've worked in the movement now for over 20 years. And if you let me, I'll just keep talking for another hour. So, but I can elaborate more when we get to the Q&A section.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you very much. And again, I'll just remind people, if you have comments you want to pass on, if you have questions you want to put to the panelists, please use the Q&A function, and those will be passed on to me. I'll share them with the audience as a whole and with the panelists for their response. So next we'll go to Nigel Barriffe. Nigel, floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. And thank you so much for having me. And I'm just so honored to be here with you and my sister Felicia and Chris, who I know whose work I firsthand witnessed and how powerful their voices have been and representative of our community. I'm here. I want to here today identify I'm a school teacher. I love being a school teacher, although I admit, Peter, I've been out of the classroom for the past 6 years. I've had the honor to be elected by my peers to represent the elementary teachers of Toronto. I'm the current vice president. And so in my role, I get to talk to literally thousands of school teachers across the city. And one of the things that we're seeing, especially with within many school classrooms, but specifically many school classrooms inhabited by our Black communities, that the defunding of the public education system that really started with Mike Harris, who I know you're familiar with, through multiple years of liberal governments, and now personified under this current Ford government, the one of the most misogynistic, hard right-wing governments we've ever seen, have been underfunding and defunding the public education system over just in the last 3 years. Peter, what the Center for Policy Alternatives have reported is that they have taken away $800 per student over the past 3 years. It means that here in Ontario, one of the richest provinces in the country, Toronto, one of the richest cities in the world, has one of the lowest funding for the public schools, and it's having a profound effect. You might ask, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? What kind of effect does that have? So just simple things like if you want to take your class to a field trip, it means that either the parents have to have the economic ability to pay for their child to pay for that field trip, or the school has to somehow beg or plead to a charity organization to lend the money to take them to go to the science center. But it's even more serious than that, Peter. What we're seeing with children with autism, for instance, we know that we have over 50,000 children that are on a waiting list just to get the kind of care that they need in the public school system. It is abhorrent and horrible what this government continues to do. And so when you look at things like how the housing situation is happening right here in Toronto, when you look at how long the food banks lineups are right now, these are many of the people that make up these waiting lists, right, that are looking for good housing. Many of the people that are standing in lines, literally standing in lines just to get a loaf of bread for that night to feed their child, are the families that we teach. And I know that, and you can talk, and I'm asking anyone on this call to go and talk to their teacher, their school teacher tomorrow, and ask them if they can see the difference between a child who had a decent breakfast in that morning or a meal that night before, and how that does it affect their performance in the classroom. And we know that it does. So this is it's an alarm. It's going off right now, that we really need to pressure this government to do the right thing by our students. Of course, we're seeing the same thing happen in healthcare, right? The two biggest files, the two things that they're supposed to take care of are the two things that this current government is destroying. And it has a disproportionate effect on Black children and Black families. Because again, when you look at the wealth and how it's distributed in our city, we know that some of the parents that live in Jane and Finch, that live in Rexdale, that live in certain parts of Scarborough that I know Felicia is also familiar with, their experience of the public school system and of course of healthcare is much different from families who live in Forest Hill and live in Rosedale. And it's wrong, and it's not fair, and it has to stop. And so it's my hope that with this month of Black resistance, of Black that we can also talk about, well, what are some of the things that are happening, and just really quickly, we know that we have, I'll tell you one of my school teachers, his name's Leroy Newbold, started what's called the Freedom School. And the Freedom School is that he works with these families. He takes most of the children that might have been pushed out of the school system. And just tonight I had a conversation with him, and he told me about how these same children, when their own aunties and their uncles wrap them up in their classrooms at this Freedom School, end up being Ontario scholars. So there's something that's going on in our system that we need to fix. I'll touch on, the Toronto District School Board has made some really, I'll give it to the management. They started something called the TDSB Center for Plaque Excellence. because they know that if we put in place the right supports, that children can be successful. But until we do something about one of the meanest governments we've ever seen, till we start funding the schools that our children deserve, it's going to make things more difficult. And I know, and I have hope that we can turn that around. I'm really looking forward to this conversation tonight. I'm looking forward to hearing my comments from my sister Felicia. So I'm going to pause there. Thanks very much, Peter.
Nigel, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I just want to remind everyone again that if you have a comment that you want to pass along or a question you have for the panelists, please enter it in the Q&A. They'll be passed along to me, and I'll either read out the comments or put the questions to our panel. Felicia, would you take it away?
I will. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Brother Nigel. That's a great segue into what I wanted to discuss. So Peter, thanks again for having me on the panel. It's such an honor to be able to be speaking here with my brothers, Nigel and Chris. These are two men that when I need help, I know I can always call on them. So just being here with them this evening and sharing space means a lot to me. So in terms of what they're both speaking about, so Chris talked about the sleeping car porters and the power of the past and what they did so that we could stand on their shoulders and we could fight back and we could win. And Nigel speaking about the challenges that we are facing now. It's a critical time, but one thing we do have, even though it doesn't always feel like it, is we have power. We have power in our being, we have power in our workplaces, we have power in our communities. And it's just a matter of harnessing that and getting out there, finding the strength, because at this point in time, we can't afford to just sit back and let this government run roughshod over us, take away our public education system, take away our public health system, because eventually we are going to feel it. You might not feel it at first, but it's going to hit you, and by then it's too late. So we need to find the strength to fight back right now. So I was asked to speak about labor and specifically the fight back in labor, but I do want to talk about the weird kind of separation that we're seeing, that we've seen for too long between labor and community. And labor is made up of community members. So this is just really bizarre to me, this weird separation. And now is the time and needs to stop once and for all, because we are all in this fight together. The thing about labor is, on paper and in words, we say that we're about building, we're about being stronger together and harnessing our power, but it's now action. It's time to take action. So what are some things that we ought to be doing? And none of this is new. I'm going to repeat what needs to be done, but we're seeing now more than ever, we need to take the steps. So organizing our rank and file members and mapping their connections. And so we look at what happened last year. We came into this year and one of the first tweets I saw was 2023 is the year of the union. And I got all tingly inside and excited because I believe it to be so. And why? Because of the fights that we saw in 2022. So things like in the US, we saw Brother Smalls, Chris Smalls out there doing his thing with Amazon and building that fight back with Black and other racialized members, and them showing Amazon that they are humans and they need to be treated with dignity and respect, and really pushing that fight forward and to be something that we're all watching around the world. We also saw organizing in Starbucks and the pushback that they're getting out there in the US, but nevertheless, they persist and they continue to fight. And come home. Let's look at what happened last year at home. The education workers, CUPE just really shows us what we're capable of and what we can do. And that really lit labor on fire, and not just labor, communities. For me, it wasn't necessarily what I was hearing in the top meetings in labor. That was great. But what was even better was seeing the community meetings that were happening and the way they were galvanizing around education workers, and seeing how their fight was a fight that they were having in their communities, that their children mattered, that these workers mattered, and how we come together to make sure we win. And what happened? Ed workers won. And that's the kind of groundswell we need to keep moving. And that momentum, it also helped others. It helped ATU in their fight. It helped Carey Place workers, SEIU workers, it helped them with their fights. And that momentum needs to keep going, which is why we need to make sure that 2023 is in fact the year of the union, so that we keep those fights going, we keep building, and we just keep building year after year. Every year should be the year of the union, the labor and community, and all of us together. So like I said, what does that look like? Organizing rank and file members. Unions need to really make it a priority to have those one-on-one conversations. If we are not getting to know our members, every single one of them, you're missing out on all of those communities that they're connected to. You're missing out on all those people who could help in fights. And not only our fights in terms of what we're bargaining for, but political fights, because it's clear with what's going on, who falls through the cracks. We need to ensure that we have governments who, at a base level, they're ready to do the fight where they are and fight for the things that matter to us, so that we are winning, our families are being taken care of, that we can go to work and pay the bills, take care of families, take care of loved ones, and not have to worry that when we do need to go to the doctor, that we won't be able to afford it or we won't have one. So we need governments that actually want to fight that fight. But what we need now is to make sure folks are pushing on that on the ground. And of course, in the workplace, when you have organized workers, you have people who are fighting back bad bosses. And just think of what that does for your mental health and wellness, knowing that you're going to work, you're doing a job, you're being respected, and you have that power to fight back on a bad boss. We need more training of members from equity deserving groups. That training works. I got to this point, everything you read out, Peter, is because of training from my former union, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. And it started off as me coming into a meeting, that gathering of folks from designated groups who didn't know a thing about their union, but we were interested, and the spark arose from there. And I managed to run in lots of elections, win most of them, and I took every step. I didn't miss a step in terms of my union involvement, and I'm really glad that my union did something to reach out to me, because I never expected to do any of those things. I had this awful fear of public speaking. I didn't want to ever be the center of attention. And then thanks to that training, I found the courage to run and bring other people along as well. In terms of leadership, we want to make sure that there's equity audits happening in our unions. Where are we? Where are we in each union? Do we have true representation of the folks who are part of our union? Is that happening? Because if you don't do the audit, you have no idea and you are missing out. And I have to say, where I am at the Canadian Labour Congress, I look at lobby days, for example, in Ottawa. And to me, that was not representative of many of the workers that I know are at our unions. That needs to change. We need to be tapping other people. That's where your power lies. How can you improve? What can you fix? And since this journey to equity and making real change can be long, we have to make sure that we're starting now, because it can take years to get equity seats. I mean, in my former union EPO, it took years to get the designated seats, and designated seats matter. That's when you have folks who will tap others who they might not urgently tap. I know for myself, I had lots of allies, but it wasn't until there were equity seats with that union that people tapped me to step into that role. And I won, yay. So we know it works. And to see other people who have won in those roles too, it's because those seats became available. You need to have targets in equity hiring. I've sat through one meeting I can think of in particular, where they were patting themselves on the back for statements that they made after the murder of George Floyd. And when I asked the question, okay, that's a great statement, what kind of equity hiring targets do you have? You should see how many people, it was like hot potato. Everyone was passing to somebody else. Nobody wanted to answer the question. And the reality was that they didn't have any. So you can't just have fancy statements. We're beyond that. You've got to now be taking action and really taking that wealth of knowledge you have in your workplaces. Do it, it matters. And once you do these things, make sure the environment is supportive. There's no point in having equity seats, equity hiring, when there's a hostile environment. That's not sustainable. You won't have quality people stay. So that has to be a priority as well. And a note, as my pastor always says, you also, I'm going to come down your row. Peter, I'm coming down your row. In terms of our party, the NDP, we have a lot of work to do. Yep. And there's a lot of folks talking about what's happened to the Black Caucus. It is Black History Month. We need to talk about it. And that was something that was promoted. It was amazing. And so many people engaged with our party because we saw that. We saw ourselves represented there with so many members of caucus. And now I see a picture of the most recent retreat, and it's devastating. Like, we see that that no longer exists. There was one person in that picture. There was Jill. I'm not sure where Laura May was, but we know Laura May is leaving. So how do you gain back that ground that you'd gained? There's all kinds of trust that needs to be regained in the community. Folks weren't happy with what happened to many folks in that caucus, how things played out. And also, how are people in the caucus treated? When we talk about, again, creating a safe environment, a good environment, that's something that also needs to be worked on, right? And if you're ever going to overcome the ghost of Pierre Elliott Trudeau that maintains that hold over our Caribbean communities, that still give liberal love, even though the love's not coming back, what are we offering that's new and different? How are we as a party treating folks? These are all questions that need to be answered and acted on. And with that, we will see the kind of change and promotion of our folks. We'll see more involvement, and we'll see that we'll win. We'll win in our workplaces. We'll win in the streets. We'll win in politics. And this is the goal. No more just talking about allyship. It's time for co-conspiracy. It's time for accomplices. How are we going to fight and win and build together? And that's where we should be at right now. Thanks, Chris. Love you.
Thank you. So folks, just again, another reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. If you have comments, put them in the Q&A. I'm going to pass them on to the panelists. I'm going to start with the first question. Are local and provincial unions leadership diverse? More diverse than the legislature of Ontario? I put that out to all three of you to comment.
I guess I'll start because I kind of talked about that in my spiel. That's a really good question. Is it really? I don't know. They might be equal because we should have more leadership within our labor unions, and we don't. I could actually name a bunch of labor leaders that are Black. I could probably name all of them. So that's a problem that I can name every Black labor leader. I can't name every non-Black labor leader. So I would say, yeah, it might be equal. Peter, you have the numbers, you see them every day, but it's not enough. At the end of the day, it's not enough. And we need to see ourselves reflected there. And we need to make sure we have folks who are building and treating us the way we ought to be treated. And when I say building, making sure that you're a mentor or femtor. Like, you need to be welcoming folks in, no personal agenda. It's about building the person you see and helping them to succeed, because there's more than enough room for all of us. So just making sure that we're sharing, we're giving back, and we're really working to see that diversity and tapping people. So a big thing the CLC Ontario team wants to do is make sure we're tapping diverse folks to run at all levels of government, because there's nothing that bugs me more than seeing wards and ridings where you don't have a candidate. And there's no need for that. We have incredible people in all of our workplaces and all of our unions. So we need to be tapping actively. I'll leave it at that. I'd love to hear what my brothers have to say.
Yes. Chris, can I throw it to you?
Sure. From what I observe, power works and operates differently within the legislature than it does within the labor movement. But they are both systems of power, and there are institutional barriers within each of those forums. They operate differently, but the barriers exist, and overcoming them isn't easy. I agree with the comments that Felicia made about who's looking out for you, because within the labor movement, I find very much power is very personal, in the sense that to overcome barriers, to access those forums of decision making, you need somebody to be there to support you and guide you through those processes, and have your back when ultimately decisions need to be made and votes need to be put in a ballot box. And the systems tend to be quite informal. And so being able to navigate through them isn't easy. So yesterday I was on a panel hosted by the Public Service Alliance of Canada, where they profiled several labor leaders, and they talked about their stories and their journeys. And none of them were easy to get to the positions that they are currently hold. I think of Jan Simpson, I think of Craig Reynolds as examples. And so in my mind, there is an underrepresentation. It's not, in my mind, it's objectively true. There's an underrepresentation of Black workers in leadership positions within the labor unions and also within the legislature as well. And that's one of the reasons I remain active in the Coalition of Black Trade Unions, is try to create a space where it can be a little bit healthier for us to, self-organize, like the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and strategize on how to break down those barriers. And So thank you for that question. And I think it's a struggle that remains as relevant today as it did for the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Thanks.
Thank you. Nigel, did you want to join in on this?
I mean, just quickly kind of building on the previous comments, I know, like, for me, this moment, especially with the Toronto mayoral race that's happening right now, this is a moment where we have to have a strong, left of center, unapologetic about having a progressive policy put on place, put on the table. No putting water in the wine. And I think, that's where, for me, the NDP has also that opportunity. I do concur with Felicia that, the Black Caucus, the Ontario NDP Black Caucus, was a shining light for me. Like, was this inspirational example of a party, really putting resources behind a group of legislature, and so I do hope that time and thoughtfulness will be put to rebuild the Black Caucus, because the Liberals continue to, many parts of the Black community, many elements within the Black community continue to support the Liberals, when I don't believe that's in the best interest of the majority of working class Black people in this city and in this province. So, and representation does matter, right? People do see it, and and so I do hope that we have a chance to work on that. And I mean, for instance, right now there's a race out in Hamilton, Sarah Jama, right? This is a wonderful activist candidate, woman of color, who has been doing the work. And this is a great opportunity for the party to, like, say, we're gonna get you that seat. It was an NDP seat, it should remain an NDP seat. So that's a current real life example of what we can do to make sure that we have the representation. Somebody, who has all of the check marks, is really smart and can do the work. And as Felicia said, they're all over the place. So let's tap them and get them put in place.
Okay, thank you. I want to just put out some of the comments. I live on Newbold Avenue in Toronto, and I now I know from Nigel about Leroy Newbold. I'll look him up tomorrow and post his history in my building's lobby. Thank you. Question to Nigel. Kudos, a comment. I was an elementary teacher for 8 years in the 80s, then left to become self-employed. Back then, the class size of my first year teaching in 72 was 42 kids. I'm so disheartened that they went down over the years, but have gradually crept back up again. It's embarrassing. Now, not so much a question, but Nigel, would you like to comment on that return of the supersized class?
Yeah, so again, under this current Ford Lecce government, and the cuts that we continue to see to public education, class size has increased. Again, reminder, the richest province in Ontario, this is the research demonstrates that we're the richest that we have ever been. It's not like we were rich 20 years ago and now we're just catching up. We actually have more revenue than we've had in the past 2 decades. And so to have the class sizes increase. And now ask yourselves, rhetorical question. Do you think children learn when they're a smaller class better, when they're smaller class sizes or larger class sizes, right? We know that smaller class sizes give more quality one-on-one time with a caring adult, with a student. We know that, look, why would private schools advertise small class sizes? They do it because they know that that's what's best for children. And so, I'm hopeful an NDP government under Merit Styles will deliver on that. But in the meantime, we have to continue to push to have the the public school system funded to meet the actual needs. So yeah, I talk to teachers all the time, and we have some ridiculous class sizes. Grade 8s, 35 grade 8 students in a tiny classroom. There's barely anywhere to sit. Not enough chairs, and not enough desks. It's just unfair. It's unjust, and we have to work together to change that.
Okay, thank you. Felicia, I'm going to try you on this one. have the changes at the top of the Toronto District Labor Council energized other unionized people of color to seek leadership roles?
That's a great question. I would hope so. I would really hope so. And you know what? Shout out to Andrea Babington, the president of the Toronto and York Region Labor Council. Yes, like she's amazing. And I have to say, when I started first going to the Toronto and York Region Labor Council, she was very supportive. She really took me under her wing. And when she'd see me at rallies, et cetera, she was always there to support. So I have a lot of love for her. And I appreciate what she's doing. It's a different environment. It feels very welcoming. I personally, and you know, my other brothers on this call can verify, but I've been seeing more people of color on the calls than I've seen before. So I think yes, but there's no way to know for sure. No one comes on and says, I'm here because of Andrea. But I would say, based on what I'm seeing in terms of participation, that yes, we're seeing a more diverse group of folks. And when I look at the other labor councils that I have 8 labor councils, but in the other ones, there definitely is not that kind of representation. So for most of those, I'm the only Black person who goes, or there's one other. So definitely we are seeing great representation, and real President Andrea is definitely a breath of fresh air, and she allows you to come as your full self and contribute what you can. And it's a safe space. So I would say, if you're in the Toronto region and you're looking for a safe space to really engage with labor, come to the Labor Council meeting. That would be the place for you. And there's all kinds of leadership opportunities there, as well as with all of our labor councils. We're looking for people to lead things. So that segues into a great way for you to get involved if you do want more leadership capabilities and abilities.
Thank you. I'll go to the next question. I have been asked to speak to Black students who live in a predominantly white community and dealing with a lot of racism, and it's causing issues such as social anxiety. What advice do the panelists have on how I can approach such a topic in relation to Black history? Chris, do you want to start off?
Sure. So yeah, that's not an easy question, but it's an important one. And you know, we talk about how do you stay healthy in white spaces? And you know, whether that's a classroom, whether that's a workplace, this is a question that a lot of Black students, a lot of Black activists struggle with, and you know, adopt a number of different strategies in order to, you know, be our true selves in spaces that aren't necessarily safe or healthy for us to be. And so, you know, when you look at the question, how can you make spaces more inclusive for Black students, for Black activists? In my mind, it starts with intentionality. You have to want to create that space, and you have to be intentional about doing it. You also need to be humble about doing it. You know, having, you know, so-called white allies, you know, play the white savior role isn't particularly helpful in certain spaces. And so you need to approach it from a degree of humility and say, you know, what is it that I need to do to make this safe, this space inclusive? What type of relationships do I need to build within the community to make these spaces safe? When I think back to the earlier question about Andrea Babington and the journey that she took as a hotel worker, an activist with an HRE, and the journey she took to become president of the largest district labor council, it's a phenomenal story, an exceptional story. And she's giving back to the community. I was with her on the weekend at the Black Workers Information Clinic being hosted by the Public Service Alliance of Canada. She's giving back. She's playing that role of trying to use the position she's now in to help create those spaces. That's the type of work we need to see.
Thank you very much. Did anyone else want to speak to that?
Look, I will. I mean, specifically, talk about Black joy, talk about Black love. There, you know, as classroom teachers, as classroom education, whether you're an educational assistant or however you inhabit the school board, every day you can talk about the wonderful positive things that are happening. You know, the challenge and what makes me so upset is that all we ever see are the negative things portrayed in the media. Yet tonight, I just came from another panel where we had 3 Black teachers that were talking about public education. They're in our system. Nobody knows them, but they just wake up every day, and they go into the school and they bring their whole self to their students. There are many role models that we can celebrate in your classrooms every day. We shouldn't be just going to talking about slavery or talking about gun violence. We can talk about all of the positive examples that there are. We can normalize Blackness in your classroom. And look, if you're really stuck and you feel like I can't do it myself, then you can bring other people from outside the classroom. I know the three of us in here would love to come in and talk with your students about how we see the world. So there are, you can tap, it's not, I know it's some of my Black friends will be saying, Nigel, why do we always have to do the work? And that's true, right? But I mean, if as a white educator or as an ally, if you do truly feel like you're stuck and you don't have anybody help, then you can ask for help, because there is lots for us to celebrate. And I think you have to start there.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go on to this question for you, Felicia. How are your unions doing the mapping of your members' associations? This is so important. It brings the power of organized civil society to bear on politicians and employers.
To be honest, I believe that this is really a work in progress. Many unions are just even wrapping their minds around organizing and why it's useful. And, a lot of time up to this point has been really on member service, helping people through workplace issues, helping people with grievances, helping people with all kinds of issues related to our collective agreement. But actually harnessing that power, to be honest, some leaders are afraid of it. So even harnessing that power and getting to the place where they're even thinking about organizing is a work in progress. And you know what? There are some unions who are already on that. They've hired their organizers, they're getting to that work. But in terms of the numbers that are actually doing the mapping, I will say I don't have the numbers, but just from what I've experienced and seen, it's something that's definitely a work in progress, and it needs to be accelerated. But it takes a lot of work to reach out to all of your membership. It's something that's going to take time, but it needs to start yesterday. So if unions aren't already on it, they need to get on it really quick. And it's a shout out, when we were on the elementary teacher of Toronto executive, that was something we worked on. We worked with Jay McAlevey. That was one of the best times of my history on that executive. When we were working with Jay McAlevey, we were doing the mapping. I remember members saying to me, I've been in the Federation for so many years and no Federation rep has had a one-on-one conversation with me. And that meant so much to them. But it's something that needs to keep going. I believe it's still going. Nigel will have to speak to that a bit more. But once you get into it, the membership appreciates it and you will see progress as long as you don't stop.
Thank you. I've got a question here. What can I, as a 72-year-old woman on a fixed income, immunocompromised, only go out for medical appointments, how can I help? Chris, Nigel, Felicia?
Can I jump in?
Yes, please, Chris.
Okay. One thing I've observed about politics in particular, we talked about barriers and how do you overcome those barriers, is winning takes energy. Peter, nobody canvasses like Peter Tabuns, and you have to put in the work to win. And so any form of contribution makes a difference. So I think about Sarah Jama, and Nigel talked about Sarah. She's running this incredible campaign where she's engaging people from all different communities. So if you can't get out and do the door knocking, she has the phone canvases, and you could do that from home using Call Hub. And maybe you make 1 or 2 phone calls, 10 phone calls, whatever it is, it's a contribution. And it makes a difference, not just symbolically, it actually makes a concrete difference, reaching out to all those constituencies and talking about those issues. When we were canvassing recently for Black Power Canvas for Sarah Jama, and we were talking to elder residents within the neighborhood, making those connections on the issues that were important, like fixed income and the rising costs of living, provide a real opportunity to have those one-on-one conversations. So there are many different ways that you can contribute. Those are just a few ideas.
Thank you. Nigel, Felicia, did you want to speak to this as well?
Yeah, and there are so many ways to organize and be involved, and you don't actually have to leave your home to do it, which is great. So if you want to help an amazing candidate like Sarah Gemma, you can do phone banking for her. And that's through, you use your computer for that. So if you have Wi-Fi, if you have access to internet and you have computer and headphones, you can help her from wherever you are. And that goes for any candidate that's running an election. So you can do that kind of work. There's always online petitions. Online petitions, especially when they're emails going to leaders, those help because when you're a leader and you have a bunch of messages filling up your inbox, they get your attention. So don't ever underestimate just a simple act like that. You're just sitting at your computer, you're typing in your first name, last name, email address, sending it off. That helps. And for many of the fights, we saw the education workers did that. Right now, we're seeing the nurses are doing that. It's real, it helps. So there's all kinds of things that you can do just from your computer. And of course, from your phone, talk to folks that you know, that you care about, your friends, your family. Talk to them about what's happening. With the OFL Enough is Enough campaign, that's another campaign that you can engage on just via sending an email to your MPP. And again, it's just a matter of first name, last name, email, talking about the issues that matter and helping folks to change their mindset, especially if they're used to voting for a particular party that might have had past relevance, that might have helped decades and decades ago, but it's not helping so much now. These are things that you can have conversations with folks about and never leave your home. So there really are a lot of ways to engage without ever stepping outside. And I appreciate the question. And I love that you want to help. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
I just, everything that Peter and Felicia, that Chris and Felicia just said. And I think, let's say even, because I, as an elder, thank you so much, because all your work that you've done, and you've earned your time for rest, to be honest with you. So for you to even say that you still want to be part of the struggle, I'm so grateful for, because as an elder, I know that when my elder says something to me, I listen, like I hear it, and so I don't know if you have grandchildren. I don't know if you have other younger folk in your family, but if you do, giving them a phone call about talking about these issues and them hearing it from you as their elder is a really important part of moving forward. You heard Felicia talking about these one-on-one conversations. Having a conversation with your own children in your family is a great place to start, and you can just do that off your landline.
So folks, it's just about 8:20, and we're going to, in a minute, go to wrap up statements. But I want to go to this question. We've got quite a few, actually, but it's an important one. And we started off the session with it about the Amazon workers in the US. Has the success of the mostly Black-led Amazon workers in the US trickled across the border to Canada? And Felicia, if we could start off with you, and I'll just say to all three of you, we're going to have to wrap up soon and have you give your closing remarks. So you have to be relatively tight on response here.
I can do that. I would say yes. Yes. I can definitely be quick. Yes, it has. And it's not even just so much their fight. Their fight has been an inspiration, but it's how they got to that point. The organizing, there's no shortcut. The organizing is what is needed. And I said in my initial words, we saw that organizing with the ed workers. We saw the momentum it brought to communities and everyone joining in. And then the momentum it gave to other unions to help ratify their agreements. So my short answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. So we're at 8:21. If we could have some wrap-up remarks from all three of you, about a minute and a half. Chris, I'm going to start with you. We started off with you, and we will start the end with you as well.
Sure. So I get a little bit more reflective about the meaning of Black history. And in my mind, I think about the story of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And Stanley Grizzell was the first Black appointment to the Ontario Labour Relations Board. And when I was articling at the Ontario Labour Relations Board, Bromley Armstrong was vice chair of the board. And so I think about that because it talks about the continuity of the struggle across generations. Black history isn't a random set of events. It tells a story that goes back 400 years, struggling up against slavery, struggling for union recognition for Black porters, struggling today for Amazon workers. It's a continuity of a long story marching towards freedom. And it can be very personal as well when we look at the story of Andrea Babington and the connection to HRE and bringing back to Bromley Armstrong, Janice Gary, yeah, and Stanley Grisell, and the stories go back generations. It's personal, and to me, it's also hopeful, because it says to me that no, the struggle is not going to end necessarily in our lifetimes, but it's heading in a direction in which it's continuing a long story of resistance against racism. And so thank you again, Peter, for the invitation to join this panel today and the excellent questions.
Chris, I'm really glad that you were available. Thank you for those comments. Nigel, I'm going to go to you next.
Sure. Yeah, I totally ditto that, Chris. Thank you. Look, every day, no matter what we look like, what our postal code is, who we love, what the color of our skin is, we wake up every day. We all want good public schools. We want good health care. We want people to have decent housing. That's what we're all working towards, that no matter where you are in life. And, but what we have to remember, what the real problem is we have Doug Ford and all of his donors and all of his lackeys and that have been like underfunding our systems. They've been like carving off the green belt, and they've been giving giving away public money to their friends. Right? Who does this? Who invites their developer friends to their children's stag and doe? That's what the real problem is. They try to divide and divert us. And so that's why, for me, I like to call this Black Futures Month, because for me, it's Black Futures. The future is us united, all of us, across race, across class, whether you're from Rexdale or Rosedale. When we come together and we fight together, we can have a strong working class movement here in Toronto and across the province that cares for people, that loves people. That's what this should be about. And Peter, so that's why anytime you call me, Peter, I'm always going to say yes, because I know that that's where your heart is. And certainly my two soldiers that I've been talking with, that's what we're going to be going back and waking up tomorrow to do again. And so I'm hopeful, Peter. I'm always hopeful. I got a 7-year-old Joshua, and I want him to know that I fought with my friends to make this world a better place than which I found it, so he can have the better place and pass it on to his kids. That's what, for me, this is about. And so that's why I just really appreciate this conversation tonight. Thank you.
Nigel, thank you very much. Felicia?
I feel like it's a mic drop after my two brothers have spoken. So let's finish with this. I really enjoyed my time here. It's been so good to be with you, Peter. Thanks again for the invitation, and my brothers, Chris and Nigel. And Chris was really good at naming our elders whose shoulders we stand upon. We couldn't be here without them. And I have my Bromley Tireless Champion for Just Causes book, which he signed. I was such a fangirl when I met him. So yeah, it was very cool. And I do want to shout out some newer leaders. These are leaders that have come along since I got involved in labor 15 years ago. So shout out to Tyler Downey, Ahmed Gaid, Laurie Antonin, Jason McLean, Yolanda D. Dacey, Vanessa Stopey, Solange Scott, Ainsworth Spence. These are people that when I need support, along with these two brothers, I will call on them, and they're always there to answer the call. So check them out. We're talking about celebrating Black history. Check them out, all amazing leaders and newer leaders. And my final thought is organize, organize, organize. We need to organize in our communities, talk to your families, because there's so much at stake. Organize in our workplaces. We need to continue to fight back bad bosses. And I'll make a plug for Justice for Workers. They're having Beat the Bosses, a boot camp this weekend. Starts on Friday, goes till Sunday. I'll be there, so it's not too late to sign up. Justice for Workers, check that out. And just keep pushing. And we need more accomplices, co-conspirators. Let's move on from allyship. Allyship to me is just so like years ago. So like, let's move on. Let's actually engage and push the envelope in our workplaces and our communities, because our collective well-being depends on it. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. I want to, I've got a lot of people to thank, but I want to thank you three panelists. I knew when you said yes that we're going to have a strong panel, and I was not disappointed. It's been a really good evening, a really interesting evening. I want to thank my staff who did all the work behind the scenes, getting the notices out, actually running things this evening. So if things actually happen in a sequential fashion, I give them credit. Thank you. And to all of you participants who joined this evening, really appreciate you taking the time. You had great, really solid questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. There were a lot of them. I was very happy. We will be posting this video of this webinar on Facebook and on YouTube. Let other people know about it. Spread the information out there. If you have an interest in this issue, just make sure that people know the kind of discussions that are going on. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a great evening and enjoy the rest of Black History Month. Bye-bye, everybody.